Hello and welcome to another cozy mystery here on The Curious Case. I'm your host, Davis, and I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And how was your day? Leave a comment. I love reading where these stories find you. Now, settle in, pour your tea, and let's begin tonight's mystery. Don't forget to subscribe for new mysteries daily. St. Mary Mead. Early spring morning. Mist still on the hedges, birds louder than usual. Miss Marple stood by her garden gate, trimming the rose stems before the next bloom. The kettle inside had just clicked off. Her cup of tea cooled slowly on the windowsill. Nothing unusual, just the kind of quiet she liked. Then came the rattle of the postman's bicycle. He raised a hand, cheerful. "Morning, Miss Marple. Got something from abroad, by the look of it." He passed her a thick brown envelope. Return address neatly typed. Somerset College of Arts. Unfamiliar. She thanked him, turned it over twice. The seal was heavy, official. Her name, written in precise black ink. Miss Jane Marple, St. Mary Mead. Inside, a single folded letter. On the top corner, the name Sir Henry Clithering. She smiled faintly. Old friend. Retired now, but still meddling in interesting matters. She read carefully. "My dear Miss Marple, a small difficulty has arisen at Somerset College. A student sketch, of little value but odd significance, has gone missing from a locked studio. The headmistress believes it a childish prank. I am less certain. Would you be so kind as to visit, quietly, and lend your particular eye? I will arrange everything." She set the paper down, eyes narrowing slightly. A sketch. Not jewels, not documents, just a drawing. Yet Henry seldom wasted ink on trivialities. She read again. A postscript followed. "Please treat this as discreet. The sketch may conceal something awkward, possibly a matter of reputation. Blackmail is suspected." Miss Marple folded the letter back into its envelope. Blackmail, at an art school. Strange pairing, but she had seen stranger. The morning breeze lifted the page corners on her table. Beside the teacup, a petal floated down from the rose bush she'd trimmed. Harmless? Maybe. But she'd learned long ago that small, harmless things often weren't. She poured fresh tea, let it cool again, then fetched her knitting bag from the chair. Routine, she thought, was the surest disguise for thought. She considered Somerset. Rural, quiet, yet often hiding city habits under country manners. A missing sketch in a locked room. Someone with a key. Someone who thought no one would notice. Someone who forgot that people like her always did. She reached for the telephone. The operator's voice crackled faintly. "Long distance to Somerset, please." As she waited, she read the closing line once more. "Your discretion, as ever, is trusted completely." Her lips moved in a small smile. Discretion was her oldest hobby. The line clicked. A voice answered at the other end, brisk and polite. "Somerset College, headmistress's office." Miss Marple said simply, "This is Jane Marple. I believe Sir Henry has written to you. I shall arrive tomorrow afternoon." There was a pause, then relief in the voice. "Thank you, Miss Marple. We'll expect you." She replaced the receiver gently. The garden was quiet again, only the hum of a bee by the window. She looked once more at the letter. The last line caught her attention. Half aloud she murmured, "Art, my dear, reveals more than it intends." Then she folded it carefully, placed it under the teacup, and watched the steam fade into still air. The case had already begun. The next morning was orderly. Miss Marple believed in orderly mornings. A list, a plan, a tray, a teapot. Nothing unexpected until the envelope returned to her attention. She placed it on the table, slit the edge, carefully, and drew out a second folded sheet. Different paper. This one bore the letterhead of Somerset College of Arts. The handwriting belonged to Miss Claire Rothwell, headmistress. She read slowly. "Miss Marple, it grieves me to write this under Sir Henry's direction, but a matter of delicacy has occurred within the college. A preparatory sketch by the late Edmund Vale, on loan from his estate, has vanished from our studio. The students are unsettled. Our trustees are concerned. The police have not yet been informed. I would value a woman's insight before such action is taken. Miss Marple lowered the page. Vale's name carried weight. His works were rare. If the sketch was genuine, its disappearance would not stay quiet for long. She read the next line. Only 6 people held keys to that room. Each swears innocence. The door shows no mark of entry. The sketch was there at dusk and gone by dawn. She thought a moment. 6 keys meant 6 opportunities. Locks were never the real barrier people were. A sound interrupted her reasoning. The front gate. Footsteps brisk, familiar. Then the sharp voice of Lady Bantry calling through the hall. "Jane, are you pretending not to be home again?" Miss Marple sighed lightly. Lady Bantry entered without waiting, gloves half removed, eyes bright. "Well?" she demanded. The postman nearly collided with me, babbling about a letter from some art place. "You're off somewhere, aren't you?" Miss Marple gestured to the chair. "Sit, Dolly. There's tea if you don't mind it cold." Lady Bantry ignored the cup and seized the letter instead. She read it faster than was polite. Her eyebrows climbed higher with each line. "A missing sketch, and you're invited to solve it. How perfectly thrilling." "It may be nothing," said Miss Marple. "Sir Henry often exaggerates for effect." "Nonsense," said Dolly. "You can't fool me. You'll go, and I'm coming too. You'll need someone to handle the luggage and the gossip." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Somerset is hardly a resort." "Then all the more reason you'll require company," said Dolly firmly. "Art people are terrible snobs. You need someone who can pretend to be one." Miss Marple considered her friend's expression. There would be no argument strong enough. She simply said, "Very well, but no interviews on my behalf. We observe first." Lady Bantry grinned. "Agreed. When do we leave?" "Tomorrow," said Miss Marple. "Sir Henry will expect a prompt reply." She placed the letter back into its envelope, tapping it twice against the table edge, a habit when thinking. 6 keys, a vanished drawing, and Sir Henry worried about blackmail. Curious combination. She looked toward the garden, where the trimmed roses still waited for bloom. "A sketch may vanish in silence," she murmured, "but silence seldom lasts." The train left Paddington at 10:30. Rain streaked the glass. Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting slow, even stitches. Lady Bantry beside her, already reading the paper aloud. "Forgery ring broken in London," Dolly said. 4 dealers questioned. "Imagine that," Miss Marple murmured. "Imagine indeed." Her needles clicked softly. The carriage filled quickly at the next stop. 5 passengers joined them. She noted them, one by one. A tall man in a dark coat first, confident stride, faint smell of linseed oil. He placed a leather case on the rack with care. The label read, "G. Field, Art Consultancy." When he adjusted his cuff, she saw a faint smear of varnish near the button. Old habit, not fresh. She marked it. Next, a young woman entered, barely 20, anxious eyes. A sketchbook clutched to her chest like a shield. The strap of her bag had paint stains. Miss Marple watched her sit opposite and glance at everyone before lowering her head. A student, the sort who carries guilt even when she's done nothing wrong. Then, Professor Hartley, short, neat, exact, the type who cleans his spectacles before speaking. He nodded courteously to the others and produced a newspaper folded to the crossword. Calm face, tense hands. He kept glancing toward the luggage rack, though nothing of his was there. The 4th, Mrs. Dean, middle-aged, brisk, efficient. She carried a purse that jingled, coins perhaps, or keys. She counted them twice before sitting, then 3 more times before closing the clasp. Not nervous habitual, the manner of someone who keeps accounts in her sleep. The last was a boy of about 18. Porter's cap, rough jacket, paper bag of sandwiches. He smiled at Lady Bantry, nodded at Miss Marple, then buried his nose in a crime magazine. The cover shouted "The Locked Room Mystery." He read fast, mouthing each word. 5 strangers, 5 roles, already forming patterns. Lady Bantry broke the silence. Quite the mix of company, Jane. Dealers, scholars, students. You'll have your hands full. Miss Marple didn't answer. She had been observing the way the dealer's eyes lingered on the student's sketchbook, and how Professor Hartley, reading, had quietly turned the page upside down without noticing. His focus wasn't on words. It was on reflection in the carriage window, the dealer's case. Mrs. Dean began to talk about rising train fares. The porter boy laughed. The dealer joined, polite, casual. Talk shifted toward London art thefts. Too many forgeries lately, said the dealer. The market's flooded. The restorer gave a dry smile. And yet the prices climb. The student said nothing. Her hand tightened on her sketchbook strap. Miss Marple kept knitting. No reaction. But her eyes recorded every small movement. People reveal themselves when they think you're just knitting. The train rattled on. Outside, fields blurred past. Inside, conversation drifted. Toward Paris auctions, security failures, and vanished works. One remark made her pause. The dealer said, "Best time to move art, before anyone knows it's missing." He smiled as he spoke. Too easily. Too sure. Miss Marple looked up briefly, her needles still, and one of them already knew the sketch was gone. The taxi stopped at the gate of Somerset College, Old Stone. Quiet courtyard, a smell of varnish and turpentine in the air. Miss Marple stepped out carefully. Lady Bantry followed, already whispering. Not much grandeur for an art school. Inside, a man waited. Inspector Hale, tall, tidy, and tired. He introduced himself quickly. "Sir Henry said you'd be coming. I'm grateful. It's a small mess, but one that stinks of something larger." Miss Marple nodded. "Tell me the facts." They walked through narrow corridors lined with unfinished portraits, paint tubes on windowsills, dust on the frames. Students whispered as they passed. "The sketch," Hale said, "belonged to the late Edmund Vale. A loan piece for teaching. Genuine, valuable, and insured." He stopped at a locked studio door. No break-in, no scratches, no sign of force. He held up a clipboard. "Only 6 keys exist. Miss Claire Rothwell, headmistress. Miss Lydia Fane, student monitor. Mr. Garan Field, visiting dealer. Professor Hartley, restoration advisor. Mrs. Dean, bursar. And the young porter, Tom." Lady Bantry blinked. "The same 5 we met on the train." "Exactly," Hale said. "Plus the headmistress, who's been near tears since breakfast." He unlocked the door. The room smelled of paint and dust. Tables covered in sketches. Brushes left mid-stroke. At the center an easel, empty frame. Just the faint outline of where a sheet once lay. "The sketch hung here," Hale said. "Vale's Study of a Woman in Blue. Simple pencil work, but famous for the eyes. It was there last night at 8. Gone by morning. Miss..." Marple moved closer. No hurry. Her handbag rested on the table as she leaned in. She examined the frame's edges, the latch on the stand, the nearby floor. She touched one corner gently, then looked at her fingertip. A faint grey mark. "Graphite," she said. "From the sketch?" asked Hale. "Perhaps, or from someone who handled it carelessly." She leaned toward the latch. A smudge there, too, and lower, just at the frame's corner, a single thread clinging to the wood. She lifted it with a pin. Blue, fine weave. Lady Bantry frowned. "Fabric?" "Fiber," Miss Marple corrected. "Not wool, possibly cotton, a sleeve hem or cuff." Hale wrote it down quickly. "No tools used," she said. "No mess, no sound. Whoever did it did not rush." He nodded. They knew what they wanted, and they had the key. Marple glanced around the room once more. A stool out of place. A patch of clean dust on the floor where something had rested, then gone. She straightened slowly. "The room tells its own story, Inspector. You simply have to listen." Hale raised an eyebrow. "And what does it say?" She looked at the empty frame again. Calm voice. Measured. "A sketch may be gone," she said, "but its shadow always stays." Professor Hartley's room was at the far end of the corridor. Door half open. a thin line of light across the floor. Miss Marple knocked once. A voice replied at once, calm and exact. "Come in, please." The room smelled of polish, turpentine, and something faintly sweet. Everything in order. Brushes clean, bottles labelled. Not a speck of dust on the desk. Professor Hartley stood by a small canvas, gloved hands, steady. He was older than she expected. Precise movements, the kind of man who timed his sentences. He removed one glove as he turned. "Ah, Miss Marple, I presume. Sir Henry told me to expect you." She smiled politely. "I only observe, Professor. Never interfere." He gave a thin smile. "Observation is the first interference, I often say." She glanced at the table. A small magnifier rested beside a palette knife, several slides of varnish samples lined up like specimens. He noticed her interest. "I was testing a new protective coat," he said. "Beeswax compound. Keeps the surface from cracking. Rather fine work, if I may say so." She stepped closer. "You used it yesterday." He nodded. "A few of the student works needed stabilizing. Young hands can be careless. But of course I finished before dusk." Her eyes flicked to his gloves. They were still faintly sticky near the fingertips. A smell clung there, camphor and beeswax. Distinct, persistent, unusual scent, she said. He looked down at his hands. "Ah, yes. Camphor additive. Preserves the wax longer. You must have a sharp nose, Miss Marple." "Old habit," she replied softly. Memory and smell worked together. He moved to tidy the desk. "Inspector Hale seemed to think I had the time to meddle with Vale's sketch. I did not. I left the college at 9. Several saw me, even Mrs. Dean." Miss Marple noted the timing. 9. Same hour the bursar locked the door. "You did not return later?" "Certainly not. I had no reason." She touched the edge of the magnifier. "A useful tool. Did you lend it recently?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. To the dealer, Mr. Field. He wanted to check texture on a student piece. Returned it this morning." "Kind of him," she said mildly. "Dealers rarely return anything." He gave a tight laugh. "Quite right, but he did. You may inspect it if you wish." She leaned to look. The rim bore a faint smear. Not wax, not dust. Graphite grey. She said nothing. He noticed, but stayed still. After a pause, he asked, "Do you believe this theft has weight, Miss Marple?" "I believe all disappearances have weight," she replied, "even small ones." She set down the magnifier and met his gaze. Calm, polite. "Your gloves," she added softly, "might be worth keeping as they are. For reference." He frowned slightly. "Reference. For truth," she said. "Sometimes it hides where polish gleams brightest." She turned toward the door. The smell of beeswax followed her out. Under her breath she murmured, "Beeswax hides cracks, and men hide truth the same way." Miss Marple found Lydia Fane in the student studio. Empty canvases lined the wall. The girl sat at a table, elbows pressed tight, a sketchbook open before her. She looked up as Miss Marple entered. Eyes red, hands trembling. "Inspector Hale said you'd want to speak with me." Miss Marple nodded. "Only if you're comfortable." Lydia gave a weak smile. "No one's comfortable here today." Miss Marple sat opposite. The table was scattered with erasers, pencil shavings, and scraps of thin paper, orderly chaos. The kind artists lived in. "You worked in the studio where the sketch disappeared," Miss Marple said. "Yes, ma'am." "You had a key." Lydia hesitated. "Yes, I was the night monitor. I lock up after practice. We all signed the book." "You signed last night?" "Yes, at 8:30. "And after?" A pause, then a quiet confession. "I came back later." Miss Marple's voice stayed gentle. "How much later?" "Near 11. Lydia twisted a rag between her fingers. "I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about the drawing. Vale's lines were perfect. I wanted to study them again, alone, just for a few minutes." "You unlocked the studio?" "Yes. The door wasn't stiff then. I thought the night air helped." "You found the sketch?" Lydia nodded quickly. It was there when I entered. I remember straightening the corner. The paper curled slightly in the frame. And when you left? Her voice shook. I looked once more. It was still there. I locked the paper, door, and went to bed. Miss Marple glanced at the smock the girl wore. Blue cotton, frayed near the cuffs. Tiny loose threads brushed against the desk as she moved. The same shade as the fiber she'd found. You work often at night? When I can't sleep. The others say I think too much. Marple noticed a faint smear on the girl's sleeve, not the deep charcoal of student pencils, lighter, silvery. Graphite dust. Different texture, she pointed softly. Your pencil? Lydia looked, frowned. Oh, no, that's not mine. Mine are softer. That must have rubbed off from somewhere. Marple said nothing. Lydia filled the silence. Inspector Hale thinks I took it. I didn't. I'd never risk that. The sketch, it was more than art. It was like touching someone's memory. Miss Marple's tone was calm. Memories can be copied too easily. Lydia blinked. I didn't copy it to sell, only to learn. You can ask anyone. Marple closed the girl's sketchbook gently. Inside, a page showed Vale's composition, copied line by line. Impressive. Almost perfect. Almost. You're talented, Marple said. But perfection leaves fingerprints. The girl's voice dropped. I didn't take it, Miss Marple. You believe me, don't you? Marple studied her face. Fear. Guilt. Exhaustion. But not deceit. She rose slowly. I believe you saw more than you remember. Lydia's eyes widened. What do you mean? Marple gathered her bag. Because, she said softly, someone else had drawn in your place. Mr. Garron Field's office smelled of tobacco and polish, the kind of place where money liked to sit still. Miss Marple stepped inside quietly. He was behind his desk, cigarette between his fingers, smoke curling in thin lines. Confident smile. Too confident. Ah, Miss Marple, he said. I've heard you're poking about. I do hope you'll clear this nonsense up. Theft is bad for business. She smiled faintly. And what business is yours today, Mr. Field? Consultation, he replied easily. Appraisals, valuations, quiet recommendations. Nothing more suspicious than taste. Her eyes drifted across the desk. A large open ledger, thick pages, neat handwriting, near the top entries for Somerset College, and one line underlined in red. Paris shipment, Vale collection, pending. She tapped the line gently. You have a shipment leaving for Paris? He exhaled a soft laugh. Just routine, my dear lady. A few reproductions for a gallery partner. Nothing to do with our little commotion here. She looked closer. A faint square imprint on the blotter. Paper had rested there long enough to leave its ghost. The shape matched the size of Vale's missing sketch. You use carbon paper? She asked mildly. Of course. Always make copies. Old habits die hard. Yet no copy of this one. He raised an eyebrow. You're sharp. But not every page needs repeating. He flicked ash into the tray and leaned back. Inspector Hale asked the same questions. I told him I saw the sketch 2 days ago. Beautiful but fragile. The paper was aging. I advised they frame it properly. That's all. And after that? Nothing. I went back to London that evening. Train logs will prove it. She nodded, eyes still moving. On a side shelf sat a magnifier. Small, metal rim slightly smudged. Professor Hartley's. She touched it gently. Nice piece. Old design. He looked up, tone easy but careful. Borrowed. I returned it this morning. After you used it to check texture, he smiled. You know your materials? Yes. A brief look. Vale's pencil work was faint. I wanted to confirm if the lines were original. Professional curiosity only. Marple's tone stayed calm. And did you confirm it? He paused, then shrugged. Let's just say some works are better left untested. Restoration often kills. Value. Wouldn't you agree? She met his eyes. They lose more when handled by the wrong hands. He laughed again, light but tight. Suspicious minds, Miss Marple. You'll have me on the scaffold before lunch. Not at all, she said. I prefer facts to feelings. He stubbed out the cigarette. Then the fact is simple. I appraised the drawing, gave my advice, and left. I didn't touch it again. She looked once more at the blotter. The faint square mark, still visible despite his effort to shift papers over it. She stepped toward the door. Tell me, she said softly, do your Paris partners enjoy student work? His smile flickered for the first time. I wouldn't know, he said, but his tone said otherwise. Marple nodded once, eyes steady. He'd already packed something, she murmured as she left. That shouldn't be packed. Mrs. Dean's office was narrow, windowless, and full of numbers. Ledgers in piles, invoices stacked like bricks. The smell of ink and metal polish hung in the air. She looked up as Miss Marple entered. Her expression was brisk, guarded. Ah, the lady detective. You'll be wanting to see my books, I suppose. Miss Marple smiled mildly. Only if they're less secretive than most people's faces. Mrs. Dean didn't laugh. Everything I do is recorded. No secrets here. She gestured to the chair. Sit, if you please. I don't often have visitors. Marple sat, her eyes moving to the wall clock. 9:30. Slow tick. Steady rhythm. You were the last to lock the art studio? Yes, said Mrs. Dean firmly. 9 o'clock sharp. I always check the lights, then turn the key myself. Routine keeps the students honest. And the key now? She lifted a ring from her desk drawer. 6 keys, each tagged. One gleamed brighter than the rest. Marple pointed. You polish them? Of course, said Mrs. Dean. Keys tarnish if left. I clean. 2 them every week. Marple nodded, thoughtful. Interesting. Inspector Hale tells me the others' keys show some wear. Yours looks newer. Mrs. Dean's lips pressed thin. Good maintenance, that's all. Marple reached for the ledger. May I? Mrs. Dean hesitated, then slid it forward. Neat handwriting. Lines of numbers, columns, initials. Payments to staff, supply purchases, travel costs. One line caught Marple's eye halfway down the page. H. Hartley, consulting fee. The entry was neat but crossed out in red ink. Marple touched it gently. This seems recent. An error, said Mrs. Dean quickly. Professor Hartley was to be paid for restoration advice. The trustees decided against it. The payment never left the account. Yet it was entered. A simple clerical note. Nothing more. Marple studied the crossed line. The red ink was fresh. The correction neat. Practiced. Do you often correct in red? Mrs. Dean blinked. Always. It shows accountability. Indeed, said Marple, though it also shows haste. Mrs. Dean bristled. Madam, I've handled every penny of this college for 15 years. There has never been a missing shilling. Marple nodded. I'm sure that's true, but sometimes money leaves traces even when it stays put. Mrs. Dean folded her arms. I had no reason to take that sketch. Art is useless to me. Yet you paid a restorer before the trustees approved. Her jaw tightened. Professor Hartley gave an opinion. I noted it. That's all. Marple closed the ledger. Sometimes notes outlive their purpose. Mrs. Dean's voice sharpened. I don't like being accused. I haven't accused you, said Marple softly. I'm only listening to what the numbers are already saying. She rose, eyes glancing once more at the polished keys. Perfect shine, no dust, no wear. Your routine is admirable, she said kindly. But routines hide more than they reveal. Mrs. Dean looked puzzled. What do you mean? Marple moved toward the door. Only this, she said, calm and quiet. Money trails are like paint, they dry but never vanish. Miss Marple found Tom in the rear courtyard, sorting parcels. Stacks of boxes, torn paper, and wooden crates surrounded him. He worked quickly, humming under his breath, unaware of her approach. Busy morning, she said. He jumped a little, then smiled. Yes, ma'am, always is after exhibitions. People order more supplies than they use. You're the porter? Yes. Tom Baker. Been here a year and a bit. He wiped his hands on a rag. Inspector Hale told me not to leave, but I've work to do. Can't stop every 5 minutes for questions. Miss Marple nodded. Then let's make them few and useful. He laughed. Fair enough. She looked at the crates beside the wall. Different stamps, different destinations. One label caught her eye. Paris. Paper samples. You handle all shipments. Everyone. Sign them in, mark them out. She pointed to the Paris crate. When did this arrive? Yesterday morning. He paused, thinking. Left it here by the studio door. That's where the supplier always delivers. Who signed for it? He frowned. Mr. Field. His name's on the seal. Strange for an art dealer to sign for paper. Tom shrugged. He said it was for the restoration class. I didn't question it. And after? I locked up the corridor. Went to supper. Came back later, it was still there. Next morning, gone. Miss Marple folded her hands. You didn't mark it in the ledger. He hesitated. Didn't have time. We were short-staffed. I meant to stamp it later. So it left unrecorded. He nodded slowly. Guess so. She glanced at the ground. Bits of string, sawdust, paper chips. One corner showed a darkened mark. Faint circular stain, melted wax, half rubbed away. She pointed. That from sealing? He bent closer. Could be. Some crates use wax stamps instead of glue. Easier to fake if you know how. Her eyes lifted sharply. You know how. He looked startled. No, ma'am. Just saying what I've seen. Mr. Field once showed me how collectors mark things without customs noticing. Said it was old habit from Paris trade. She smiled faintly. And this crate went to Paris, too. He nodded again. Supposed to. But I never saw the driver collect it. Maybe the dealer moved it himself. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the storage ledger, propped near the door. Several lines filled, one space blank. No stamp, no initials. She asked, Tom, did you ever see what was inside? He shook his head. Didn't open it. Rules rule. Never touch the goods. Yet you carried it alone? Yes, ma'am. Lighter than it looked. Must have been empty paper folders. Her voice softened. Sometimes empty things are heaviest, Tom. He frowned. I don't understand. You will, she said gently. He shifted uneasily. Is it bad, ma'am? Not yet, she replied. But silence around crates usually means someone's watching where they go. She turned toward the door, notebook already in hand. Tom, she asked one last time, when you didn't stamp it out, did you tell anyone? He looked down. No, ma'am. I thought it didn't matter. She nodded once. It matters now. And as she walked away, she murmured to herself, unstamped exits tell louder stories than signed ones. Miss Marple asked for a quiet room. Inspector Hale obliged. The old staff lounge empty, plain. One clock on the wall. She placed her notebook flat on the table. Let's put this in order, she said. Hale nodded. Go on. She began with calm precision. Mrs. Dean locked the art studio at 9. She says the door was secure. Professor Hartley claims he left the building at 9 as well. Lydia Fane returned at 11, found everything normal. Morning porter opened at 7. The sketch was gone. Hale crossed his arms. Exactly. A locked room puzzle. Perhaps, said Miss Marple, or perhaps only an untimed one. She took out a small folded paper and began to draw. Here, the studio. Here, the corridor. Here, the bursar's office. And here, the guard's route every 30 minutes. Hale watched silently. She drew arrows, short and neat. Guard passed at 9:30. Then again at 10. He saw no one. She paused. The bursar's clock, she said slowly. How accurate is it? He frowned. Dean's clock. No idea. Why? She wrote 9 on her ledger when she locked the door. But her key had fresh polish, and her handwriting hesitated on that digit. If her clock ran slow, Hale caught on, then she might have locked it closer to 9:10. Precisely, said Miss Marple. And the guard's route passed at 9:10 on the far side of the building, meaning someone could leave the studio unseen. He straightened. So, 10 minutes unaccounted for. 10 minutes, she said quietly, is enough to carry a frame to a storeroom. Enough to place it in a crate marked for export. Enough to turn theft into shipment. Hale rubbed his chin. You think Field used that window? I think someone made sure the clock's slowness gave him one, and someone else made sure no one noticed. She pointed to the paper again. Route in, route out. The studio connects through the back stair. It opens beside the storage room. No alarm. No witness. He studied the map. It's clean. Too clean. Exactly, she said. Clean means planned, and planned means known by more than one. She folded the paper carefully, aligning each corner. A picture doesn't vanish in chaos, Inspector. It vanishes in silence. Silence arranged by routine. Hale sighed. You make it sound inevitable. Miss Marple looked at the folded paper, thoughtful. Only if people stop counting minutes, she said. He frowned again. 10 minutes doesn't seem much. It never does, she replied, until you find what fits inside it. She slipped the paper into her bag. Then she looked at the clock on the wall. It ticked softly, one hand slightly behind the other. How slow is that clock? She asked. About 10 minutes, Hale said. She smiled faintly. Then our theory already has proof. He nodded once. Then it's time to talk to Field again. She rose. No, she said softly. It's time to see who adjusted the time. Her eyes stayed on the clock. Calm, sharp, sure. In 10 missing minutes, she murmured, an honest picture became a lie. Inspector Hale led Miss Marple into the storage room. Dim light, cold air, crates stacked against the far wall, marked with foreign labels. He pointed. There, the Paris shipment. Came in yesterday morning. Supposedly collected last night, but no driver logged. Miss Marple stepped closer. The crate was larger than expected. Label neat. Paper samples. Paris. Beneath it, a faint outline of another sticker, older, partly torn away. She bent closer. French custom seal, she said quietly. Already used once. Then reapplied. Hale looked doubtful. You mean it's been through export before? Or meant to appear so, she replied. Smugglers often reuse seals. Saves questions. She traced the torn edge with one finger. The paper lifted slightly, revealing wax residue underneath. She sniffed lightly. Camphor. Beeswax. Same scent as Professor Hartley's gloves, she murmured. Hale leaned in. Beeswax? In packaging? Protective lining, she said. Harmless, if honest. Very helpful if you want to conceal something flat. He crouched beside her. You think the sketch was hidden inside? I think it traveled before anyone missed it. She pulled a small penknife from her bag. The blade slid under the lid's edge. The wood gave with a dry creak. Inside, blank drawing boards. Dozens, stacked tightly. All new, all clean. Perfect decoy, Hale muttered. Miss Marple reached to the bottom. Her gloved hand met smooth resistance. The boards sat on a lining soft, waxed and faintly yellow. She pressed a fingertip to it. A thin film of beeswax stretched slightly under pressure, holding shape. When she pulled back, a perfect print remained. She held her finger toward the light. See that? Hale nodded. Whoever handled this last didn't wear gloves. Or wore them before, she corrected. Wax remembers touch longer than cloth. She took out a small scrap of tissue and lifted a piece of the lining. The underside bore the faint mark of graphite dust. She smiled faintly. Transferred through pressure, she said. Paper once rested here. It left part of itself behind. Hale stared. So the sketch was pressed between these layers? Exactly. A double board. Quick. Neat. Quiet. Once sealed, no one questions paper samples. He stood shaking his head. Field signed that crate himself. Tom said so. And no one stamped it out, said Marple. Unstamped exits always hide something. She folded the wax scrap and placed it into an envelope. Camphor to preserve. Beeswax to disguise. Both from Hartley's bench. Hale frowned. You think Hartley and Field work together? Partnerships, she said. Form easily when profit glues them. He exhaled sharply. This is bigger than an art prank. She nodded. Blackmail never travels alone. It packs itself carefully, layer by layer. Hale glanced toward the door. What will you do with that? Keep it, she said. Truth has a scent, and this one sticks. She looked once more at the empty crate. Her tone was quiet, certain. He sealed his guilt, she said, as neatly as his package. Lady Bantry arrived at Miss Marple's room with a folder in hand, her face flushed with triumph. I've done it, she said breathlessly. I told the clerk I was investigating freight rates. He didn't even blink. Miss Marple looked up from her notebook. What have you found, Dolly? One shipment. Just one. Went to Paris the same morning the sketch disappeared. She unfolded a sheet, here signed by G. Field. Destination listed as Rue Beaumarchais. Same address his firm uses. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Consistent. Dolly grinned. But wait. The invoice itself, look at the paper. She laid it flat on the table. College letterhead. Somerset College of Arts. Miss Marple leaned closer. Official stationery. Exactly. Inspector Hale says none should leave the bursar's office. Marple examined the sheet. The edge is uneven. A faint grease mark along the top, likely from the bursar's polished desk. She turned it over. Typed with a machine? Yes, said Dolly. Look here. Every E is faint, half missing. See? Marple looked closer. Indeed, each E appeared lower and thinner than the rest. A ribbon fault. She spoke softly. The bursar's office typewriter. Dolly blinked. You're sure? Quite sure. The bursar used the same one on her ledgers. I noticed when she wrote the word fee. The E was nearly gone. Lady Bantry gasped. Then she typed the invoice for Field. Or allowed it, said Miss Marple. Either way, it connects them. Dolly frowned. But she said the payment to Hartley was crossed out. No funds moved. Why help Field? Miss Marple tapped the invoice gently. Favors don't always start with money. Sometimes with loyalty, sometimes with pressure. Either can buy a signature. Dolly sat down, puzzled. You think Field blackmailed her? Perhaps. Or convinced her it was for the college's good. People excuse dishonesty when it wears polite purpose. Marple reached for her pencil and underlined a line on the page. Weight declared. Fragile materials. Personal documentation. Her eyes narrowed. False description. It should read paper samples. Dolly stared. So the invoice hides the content too? Marple nodded. Every lie leaves fingerprints, even on a typewriter. She aligned two sheets, the college letter from the bursar and the shipment invoice. The margins didn't match. The spacing was slightly off. When two hands type one lie, she said softly, the spacing never fits. Hale entered just then, holding a note. Telegram from Customs, he said. They confirm a crate from Somerset arrived in Paris 2 days ago. Opened. Empty. Of course, said Miss Marple. An empty shell always travels faster. Hale frowned. So the bursar typed it, Field signed it, and the crate carried nothing but blanks. Not blanks, she corrected. A diversion. The real sketch left earlier, Dolly whispered. Then we're close. Miss Marple folded the invoice carefully, slid it into a notebook, and said quietly, Now we know who helped him write the crime. Evening settled across the college. The corridors were quiet. Inspector Hale gathered the staff in the main studio. One long table, 6 chairs, faces tense, waiting. Miss Marple entered last. She carried her small handbag and a folded handkerchief. Inside it 3 small items. An empty frame screw, a blue fiber, and a thin scrap of wax. Thank you for coming, she said calmly. Her voice was low but firm. We will speak simply tonight. No accusations, only facts. No one replied. Professor Hartley adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Dean clasped her hands too tightly. Lydia Fane sat pale and silent. Mr. Field lit a cigarette and smiled faintly. Marple placed the frame screw on the table. This came from the easel. It holds nothing now. Yet it held something worth deceit. Field exhaled smoke. Philosophical, Miss Marple, but hardly evidence. She ignored him. Next, she laid down the blue fibre. This, she said, was on the frame corner. A thread from a student's apron, perhaps. But that same student returned at 11, found the drawing still there. It was taken later. Mrs. Dean shifted. Her key ring jingled softly. Then, Marple continued, we have this. She opened the handkerchief and set the wax scrap beside the others. Camphor beeswax, found inside a crate marked Paper Samples, Paris, used to seal one stolen sketch. Hartley cleared his throat. Coincidence, he said. I use beeswax daily. It preserves paint. Indeed, said Marple. And you shared it with Mr. Field, who used your magnifier to inspect the sketch before it vanished. Field's smile thinned. I returned that magnifier. Yes, she said, with graphite still on the rim. Silence stretched. Only the clock ticked above the door. Marple looked toward Mrs. Dean. The invoice sent to Paris was typed on your machine. Missing letter E. A flaw impossible to hide. Dean's lips trembled. I only typed what was dictated. I thought it was for insurance paperwork. Marple nodded gently. Of course. Mr. Field dictated, I assume. Field flicked ash into the tray. You seem fond of my name, Miss Marple. Shall I confess to signing forms too? No need, she said quietly. Your signature appears on the shipment slip, and your cuff carries the same varnish found near the missing frame. He looked down instinctively. A quick motion, too quick. He wiped his cuff with a folded napkin. Marple watched. No one spoke. People often give themselves away, she said softly. Not in speech, but in polish. Field looked up sharply. Meaning, she said. The more carefully you shine the surface, the clearer the crack becomes. Hale stepped forward. Mr. Field, I'd like you to remain seated. Field started to protest, then stopped. His hand froze halfway to his cigarette. Marple gathered her notes, her eyes calm, her tone unchanged. One gesture too polished, she murmured, and the whole facade cracked. The studio was silent. Every eye on Mr. Garron Field. The cigarette in his hand burned down to the filter. Inspector Hale waited. No threats, no raised voice, only stillness. Field sighed, then smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides exhaustion. Very well, he said. Let's end the guessing. He set the cigarette in the tray. I took the sketch. Lydia gasped. Mrs. Dean's hand flew to her mouth. Hartley looked down at the floor. Marple didn't move. Go on, she said quietly. Field leaned back. His tone became businesslike. I planned to ship it to Paris, not to destroy it. To sell it to a collector who would keep it properly preserved, protected. The college was letting it rot in a student room. Inspector Hale asked, and the method? Field nodded toward the crate diagram on the table. In the wax lining, 2 thin boards, beeswax between. Hartley helped design the layer. He called it protective sealing. Hartley's head jerked up. I never knew what he intended. I thought it was restoration testing. Field laughed softly. Of course you did. Marple interrupted. Mrs. Dean typed the export papers? Dean's voice cracked. He said it was insurance transfer, temporary. I swear I didn't know. Field shrugged. She's telling the truth. I dictated the form. She only filled it in. She doesn't like loose numbers, so she made sure the invoice balanced. Hale wrote quickly. You planned it. Alone, then? Field shook his head. No one plans alone. You just tell people what they want to hear. Hartley wanted recognition. Dean wanted order. I wanted profit. Everyone got something until the frame went missing too soon. Marple's tone stayed even. You meant to remove it quietly, but the crate went unmarked. Yes, he said. Tom forgot to stamp it. Customs held it longer than expected. Bad luck. Hale asked. And Vale's name? You forged that too? Not forged, Field said. Restored. Hartley produced a fake letter confirming ongoing examination. Perfect cover. The sketch would have reached Paris clean, certified, and valuable. Lydia whispered, You'd have sold it as original? Field smiled again. Wouldn't you, if you could save it from neglect? Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. You call it saving? Someone had to appreciate it, he said sharply. Art dies in storage. Marple's voice softened. And integrity dies in motive. He frowned. What does that mean? She looked at him calmly. Theft wrapped in purpose, she said, is still theft. Field said nothing. The cigarette smoke hung between them, unmoving. Inspector Hale finished his notes. You'll be charged, Mr. Field. Forgery, export fraud, and theft. Field gave a weary nod. Fine. Just remember, the art world applauds forgery until it's caught. He looked toward the empty frame. Vale understood that. Marple gathered her papers. Her expression didn't change. She spoke almost to herself. Art forgives brushstrokes, she said quietly, not deceit. Rain returned to St. Mary Mead. Thin, steady, familiar. The sort that softened everything but never stopped. Miss Marple sat by the window. The garden looked washed, quiet, obedient. A kettle murmured from the stove. Lady Bantry filled the doorway, holding a tray with 2 cups. Well, Dolly said, setting it down. The papers are calling it the Somerset sketch scandal. Rather dramatic for a bit of pencil, don't you think? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Drama helps people understand what reason already solved. Dolly sat opposite. You never told me when you knew it was Field. The moment he smiled at the wrong time, said Marple. Guilt has rhythm. His was half a beat too late. Dolly poured the tea. Steam drifted up, slow and certain. He said he did it for art, she said. Men always say that when they're caught doing something greedy. Marple nodded. Guilt always borrows fine words. It dresses itself in virtue, makes the theft sound noble. Dolly stirred her cup. Poor Mrs. Dean. She looked ready to faint. Imagine learning your signature started a scandal. She'll survive, said Marple. Orderly minds mend quickly. It's the deceivers who stay cracked. The rain ticked softly against the panes. For a moment neither spoke. Dolly broke the quiet first. Funny, she said, how a picture of silence caused such noise. Marple looked out toward the roses. Their heads drooped under the rain. Yes, she said. Silence hides more than sound ever could, but it cannot hide forever. Dolly leaned back. You think Field will talk? He'll talk to himself, Marple replied. In prison, even the proud need company. Guilt is excellent conversation. Dolly smiled. You almost sound sorry for him. Marple shook her head. I reserve sorrow for the innocent. He was clever, not wise. Cleverness always forgets the moral. They sipped their tea. Outside, thunder muttered once, far away. Dolly sighed. I still can't see how you put it together so fast. Marple looked up. It was simple. A varnish stain that shouldn't be there. A key too polished. A letter typed with a broken E. Each detail small, but truth grows in fragments. Dolly chuckled softly. Remind me never to lie to you, Jane. You'd be terrible at it, dear, said Marple kindly. Your eyes talk before your mouth does. The kettle hummed again, as if pleased to be part of the conversation. Dolly stood and refilled their cups. She turned back. You ever get tired of it? Solving things? Watching people trip over their secrets? Marple smiled, faint, almost tender. It's not the secrets that tire me. It's the way they pretend to be innocent. Dolly nodded slowly. Guilt does cling. Marple looked at her, calm and certain. Guilt, dear, she said softly, stains deeper than paint. Dolly raised her cup in quiet agreement. They drank together while the rain pressed on the glass. Steam curled between them, light and slow. And as the kettle gave one last sigh, Miss Marple whispered her final thought. Truth cools slower than tea. So then, tell me, dear listeners, did you see it coming? A soft pause. Could you have guessed before Miss Marple did? Was it the blue fibre, the wax lining, or that faint letter E that finally gave him away? Another pause. You'd be surprised how often truth hides in plain view, under polish, under routine, under something as ordinary as a key. He chuckled lightly. That's the trick of St. Mary Mead, isn't it? Quiet lanes, tidy gardens, and a murder's logic waiting beneath the teacups. He let the moment breathe. Now, I want to hear from you. Which clue caught your ear first? Leave a comment below. Let's see who spotted it before our dear Jane did. The sound of a kettle faintly rising behind his words. And if tonight's tea has cooled, he said softly, don't worry. Tomorrow, another kettle will boil, and another quiet crime will whisper through St. Mary Mead. He ended with a smile you could almost hear. Until then, keep your minds sharp, and your hearts are steady. The kettle whistled once. Then, silence.